Okay. All right, so we have the landscape.jpg image that I drug in here. And the first thing I'm going to always do is actually go up to my image mode panel, and then I will change it from RGB to CMYK. So the first thing you're going to see is a drastic color change here. And maybe it's not so much on this monitor, but it is on the screen. So I'm going to kind of zoom in here on the blues and the green area and open up my history palette. You can see your history palette here on the right is top right is going to basically show you all the steps from beginning to current state, what you've done in this Photoshop document. So if I do Command Z, that's going to undo and redo back and forth. You can see that there is a color change here going on. So it's going from this kind of gray, sad-looking sky. The greens are not so green as they are on the original to bright. So that's the difference between RGB and CMYK for this image in particular. Every image is different, of course, but I definitely pick a very strong blue image and a very strong green image to show the difference between the two. So the idea here is that when I convert to CMYK, I really want to get it as close to the RGB image as I can, just to make sure that that original effectiveness of that image is still maintained when this file goes to print. So one of the ways to select that imagery there, I'm going to kind of drag over just a little bit, is I can use what's called destructive color editing. So destructive color editing, and I'll open my layers palette here on the right, really says that whatever changes I make to my base image are going to be permanent changes. Non-destructive color editing is changes that are made to an image that doesn't permanently change or alter the pixels on the image. So with destructive color editing here, what I'm going to do is go up to image, and I'm just going to permanently change these pixels. And throughout the day today, we're just going to talk about destructive color editing. In my demo tomorrow, or Thursday, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about this non-destructive color editing. So what I'm going to do is go to Image Adjustments and Selective Color. And then Selective Color, what this is going to do is actually allow me to target colors from the color gamuts that we went over basically last week, right? So our reds, greens, and blues are RGB, and our yellow, cyan, and magenta, and black, and it also includes whites and neutrals. Whites because we're working on screen, so red, green, and blue pixels make up the whites together in this instance, so we can edit that before it goes to press. So what I'm going to actually do is go to blues, right? So this is going to be the red in the RGB color space, but the blues. We're still working in a CMYK color space document, but what's nice about this menu is I can select basically the primary colors of blues. And so typically what I do here is I increase the cyan for that, and then I'll increase the magenta a little bit to sort of darken the sky. And that's pretty much about it. I like to move these other sliders a little bit just to see if I get any effect, but really nothing there. So that's one way of actually selecting. You're not really taking a selection tool in that regard, but you're really selecting a color, and then you're increasing or decreasing cyan, magenta, yellow, black color values. If we were in the RGB color space, this would be a little bit different. So here, what I'm going to do is actually go to the drop down for cyan. I'm going to see what I can do there. If I can intensify the cyan, I can a little bit. And kind of leave it at that. So I'm going to see how close this is to what I started with. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be close. Close enough. It'll be better than where it was when I did a straight conversion, right? So you can always preview. And you might already know this probably, but if you hit this preview box, you can kind of see and undo and redo what you did, or what you're doing, I guess, with this selective color image adjustment. So I'm okay with that. And so what I typically like to do here is go into my history palette again, open it up, and say, from my selective color step, how did I change? So it looks like actually my sky got really a lot bluer. Almost looks a little bit better. Still has that dark, it has to be a little bit darker though. It can't have that neon-ish blue to it. So that's fine. And you know, if you're okay with that, that would be okay with you too. Otherwise, you could continue working on it. The next thing I'm going to do in this scenario is actually go to my layers palette and go to image adjustments again. Again, do another destructive color editing step, and then hit selective color again. And I'm going to try the greens this time. So I really need to brighten up those greens like I had in my original image. So again, cyan and yellow make green. So I'll just boost those like 30%. And then I'll turn it on and off and see kind of what happened. You can kind of see it on your screen. It's really subtle. It goes from a very yellow green to a sort of a bluish green there. My screen is a lot more, you can really see it a lot better. And plus there's light in here. But on the video you'll definitely be able to see me clicking that preview box on and off. Maybe I want to like increase some black in the green too, to increase some more contrast in there. Let's see what that does. Yeah, so that really affects maybe more of the contrast there. So I'm increasing the blacks and the greens to give it a more richer, richer green tone. So I'll hit OK there. And so yeah, before and after, you can really get a sense of the changes that I made. And then actually from CMYK conversion to current, going back and forth here, it's a really, really big difference. From a subtlety standpoint. So another way you can kind of undo and redo, so I was of course doing Command Z. You can do Command Option Z and you can undo individual steps. Okay. 2. So, and then if I do Command Shift Z, no, that's not going to do anything. All right, so if you want to go like one step back, you can do Command Option Z. Otherwise, if you want to jump to a specific thing you did in your menu here, you can kind of jump to it in the history palette. All right. Another thing that I do all the time when I open a file is I'll always check the size of the file. So I'm always going into image and image size. And this is a menu that I jump into all the time. And I really want to see here how big in reality is this image, and from the pixel dimension. So you're going to see the pixel dimension size, you're going to see the image size here, all things very important, and the width in inches and height. And the most important probably is this resolution here, 300 pixels per inch. So this is optimized for print. Print is 300 pixels per inch. Screen resolutions go from 72 to 150. Typically, most of the time it's 72. With higher resolution screens now, some people like to go a little higher, like 120 or something like that. I always keep it at 72 just because most people don't have that type of screen. And if they do, it's a mobile device, and it's the width and height from a pixel standpoint is so small that it comes out pretty crisp anyway. Beyond all that, if you want to increase the size of this image, what you want to do is either adjust the width or the height here. But so for the width, I kind of put it as 10 inches, and that kind of doubles the size of it, right? Almost, yeah, almost doubles the size of it. Now, the problem with that is that I have my resolution still at 300. So really what it's taking is those 300 pixels and just kind of stretching them double. What we want to do is actually make sure that the same amount that we pack more pixels into that area to kind of compensate for the image resize. So I'll cancel out of this. I'll go up to image size again. And instead of having this resample box checked, I'm going to uncheck the resample box, and then I'm going to size up the image to approximately double. So that's 10 inches. So when I do that and I don't have resampling checked off, you're going to see that the resolution goes from 300 to 170. Okay, that drop in resolution makes sense because I'm increasing the size to double, and it's almost cutting the resolution in half, which makes sense. That's reality. So I'll hit OK, and I'll go back into image size again, and then this time I'll hit resample, and then I'll just change the pixel resolution to 300. And then for this image in particular, the reason why I want to take a closer look at it, and I'm going to hit my magnifier here, is that I want to make sure that when I size this thing up, it's not going to look too horrible, right? So what you have here are some tools that you can use. So this reduce noise tool is going to help with certain images that have a lot of detail in it. So typically I'll put this up to like 75. Usually I go real high. And then another thing you want to look for is what kind of image is this? Is this a really detailed image, or is this like a less detailed image? And that comes with the type of image that it is. So this image in particular has a lot of clouds, a lot of soft things. If there's a lot of like people, let's say it's a person with a lot of facial hair and stubble, that has a lot of detail there, right? If it's a clean-shaven person or something like that, not a lot of detail. So with that example, you can figure out on this menu what you want to select next to resample. Do I want to preserve the details in the enlargement, or do I want the enlargement to have smoother details? In this case, I'll hit smoother detail, because that's going to help me out, because most of my content here is clouds and it's really smooth. If I go back to the detail, it doesn't much change in the detail. It actually kind of makes the body of these little weeds and stuff down here worse. So I'm actually going to hit OK on the bicubic smoother option. And then so now, after those couple of steps, I have a larger image at 300 pixel per inch resolution. And so it's like 10 inches rather than 5 wide. Keep in mind, if you're working on something that's like a billboard, right? If I'm looking at a typical billboard, sometimes there's billboards that can only be a certain distance from the highway or something like that. So keep in mind that if I'm looking at a billboard and it's like, I don't know, from here to like that building over there, the resolution doesn't have to be 300, because 300 ppi resolution means that it's a resolution, 300 pixels per inch makes it crisp for a printed piece that's like right in front of me in my hand, like reading distance, you know. If I put my reading glasses on and I looked at it, it would be crisp from here. But if the image is way out there, I don't need that many detailed pixels in there. So when you get like an image that that is supposed to be like a billboard, for instance, it shouldn't be like a 10-foot wide by 5-foot tall billboard at 300 pixels per inch. It should be about 72 pixels per inch. There's a formula for that, and I'd have to go on Google search and find it. But if you ever come across like a billboard project, which I don't know how many there are these days, I don't really do those too much. Maybe like 8 years ago I was doing a lot more. But something like that, just kind of Google search what that pixel resolution conversion is. It's somewhere, I think it's like 150 actually. So for every 300 pixels per inch, you're just going to want to scale it down to 150 at a full size. And that both keeps your file size really small so you can send it to a printer easier, not wait around for your computer to catch up with your file progress for uploading or something like that, and also keeps it still just as crisp as if it was like at 300. Okay. All right. Let's see. What else? Some other things you might want to do, let's say. Let's say I'm going to show you another interesting destructive color editing piece. And that's under Adjustments, if you go to Selective Color. Oh wait, I'm sorry, replace color. Here it is, replace color. So there's selective color and replace color. To me, they sound kind of very similar, so they make it a little confusing. If you replace color, this menu here will allow you to just select a pixel tone from your object, right? So I'll select this green here. And so what you can see on this little tiny thumbnail here is the tones of pixels that I've kind of selected. And I can increase or decrease the fuzziness. That's like kind of the range of the colors that I selected. I'm going to try and select another area again. Here we go. It's got more of the green. And I'm going to hit my Shift key, so you can see my little eyedropper tool is going to add this plus sign. So you can actually select a color and then continue to add pixels to it that are similar, right, of that green color. And this might be a little bit too much, but you can actually adjust your fuzziness too. So if I decrease the fuzziness, you can see the range of the pixels that are kind of close that it's selecting or deselecting. And what you can do essentially is actually click this color picker at the bottom and then just select a different color from it. And you should be able to directly replace that color. Let me hit cancel that. Try it again. Yeah, so let's say I wanted like my crops to look like that, like purple crops. It's basically taking the green pixels and just doing a direct replacement with like different tones of this color into them. And so I'm going to actually kind of zoom in here. I'm going to do Command plus. Oop. Yeah, so I want to zoom into this main image, so I'm just Command plusing while my window's open. And then I'm going to hold my Shift key again, so my eyedropper has that plus sign. I'm going to select like this yellow tone pixel here to add to what I have going on. So that's actually adding more to my selection, so it's actually adding a little bit more purple to replace the colors, or purple tones to the image. And the more I do this, the kind of more aggressive the color change gets. Now, if I were, now this is getting pretty particular, if I wanted to like expand this purple corn husk, you know, foreground, I can actually drag the fuzziness up. And you can see, so if I go forward a little bit and kind of zoom in on these pixels, if I drag the fuzziness up, I should be able to spread that selection a little bit more. So see, this is not what I want because now it's affecting the cloud. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit to like in the 70s. And then I'm going to have to go back and then add more to my selection here by doing a shift click onto those areas at which I'd like to do a replace color on these corn husk pieces. I'll do that last one. So that's another way of both selecting and replacing color essentially in a document. I'll undo that a couple times. Go back to my image size. Another way to select is there's so many ways to select in this program, it's just insane. So under channels, so if I wanted to select based on color channel, I could do that. So I can open up my channels menu, and let's say I wanted to select the areas of yellow here, and I wanted to change them. See these little thumbnails here on the right? So I have a CMYK image, and then you can actually separate these plates, if you will. So if you recall our demo, or really our drawing of the printer press up there, we had cyan, magenta, yellow, and black plates. And this is the same idea in the channels menu. They're just calling it channels. The printer person will call it plates. They're really the same thing. So these are just really photo negatives of those four different colors on the printing press, just embedded as data into this image. So I can select, I can isolate those different plates, if you will, here by color. So usually, typically when I want to select something here, I want to make sure that it has, using the channels menu, I want to make sure it has a lot of contrast. So a lot of times what I'll do is change something to black and white to get more contrast, to select an image like a texture or something like that. Sometimes what I'll do is come to this menu and see what I can select. So for this instance, excuse me, I can see that these corn husks down below have a majority of those yellow pixels, and less of those yellow pixels are up in the sky. So this gets me really close to a selection. So what I'm going to do is select this yellow channel, and I'm going to hit this Load Channel as Selection button, which is down here. If you hover over it, it should pop up. Here we go. Load Channel as Selection will pop up. And so what I'll do is click that, and you can maybe see it on screen, but you can see these, what they'll call marching ants, or these like little dotted lines that kind of like moving around here. You can see that it's selecting the yellow channel. But what it's actually doing is showing me a selection of the sky here, right? This is where all my stuff is that I want. So what you'll need to do is really inverse your selection. But this is another way of selecting your canvas, right? So I'll go back to, actually I'll click my CMYK icon here and keep my selection. So my selection is still active. I'll go back to layers, hit background, and I'm kind of back to square one with the selection added. So this is a way to select. I can go to select and inverse up here in my menu, or Command-Shift-I. That'll inverse the selection that I have. So you can, whatever you can deselect or not select is something that you can select using this inverse selection, okay? Sometimes it's easier to select something and then inverse the selection to select the other thing that is harder to select, okay? So I always jump back and forth with those. So I'll inverse the selection, right, so to isolate all of my pixels down to the bottom. Actually, Command-Shift-I, I'll inverse that again because I want to get the sky. And I want to see what is actually going on, what is actually selected, because these marching ants here can be very deceiving, right? You can see that down below, it looks like they're very, crisp, like on the edges, like it's really black and white, right? That's not really necessarily true. Like the edges of this some of the areas could be selecting, have like a feather, some could have a hard edge, whatever. It just kind of all depends based on what that yellow channel had. So what you can do is actually go to this Edit and Quick Mask Mode tool. So if you're ever unsure about what you have selected in Photoshop and what you don't, this is a great tool. So I'll hit this Edit and Quick Mask Mode, and I'm going to be able to see here essentially what I have selected, okay? And then I can actually see that the color I picked for this is blue, right? So I double-clicked on this Edit and Quick Mask Mode. You can see the options that you can have. So you can see here that the color will indicate a masked area or a selected area. My options say selected area. You can change the color of what is a selected area. So maybe I'll choose this magenta color and then hit OK. So you can actually see then easier what is selected and what's not. It's kind of what you can also do in Edit Quick Mask Mode is use the brush tool and the eraser tool to select or deselect things. So I have areas here in the sky that are selected. Let me go back and inverse my selection, Command-Shift-I, or in the menu it's going to be Select Inverse. And I'll go back to Quick Mask Mode again. Okay, now this is what I have here. I want these selected, that's perfect. But I want more because there's pieces of it that are not selected that I want to make sure are included in my selection. So really simply, you can just take a big, large brush and then just start brushing these areas in to add to my selection. So whatever I'm brushing, I'm adding. And I want to stay kind of further away from the edges here. This is where my selection gets a little bit more detailed. But I want to stay closer to the base of the brush here where it gets thick and a lot of that color is being affected, okay? Up in the clouds, I have some areas of cloud that are actually inadvertently selected. So you can see with this pink color that I have going on is you can see parts of the clouds that had some pixels that I need to get rid of. So I'm going to hit E, which is the eraser tool, and I'm going to left and right bracket. The right bracket will make this larger without me having to go to a menu here. Menu options are across the top here too. And I'm just going to erase essentially what is selected in the clouds. Now this way of selecting is a little bit, it just depends on what your kind of working style is. If you like to use brushes, this is a great quick way to use is to select or deselect things as well. I like to use the brushes specifically for this purpose, but also I like selecting things with the pen tool, because my style really is more graphic, where I have a lot of hard edge stuff and maybe very little feathered edges and things like that. This all depends on what you're working on at any given point in time. So I get out of quick mask mode, and then I'm going to use another pixel editing tool here. So let's say for this instance I want to use hue saturation. So I can go to Image Adjustments and Hue Saturation. And this tool will allow you to basically change the hue of the pixels that I have selected here. So kind of does the same thing, but maybe in a more efficient way, less efficient way. Just depends on what you're doing. So this, I'm showing that these crops are kind of like dead. This is like a fall time picture. So I'm adjusting the lightness, the saturation of the color here in the hue palette, and so on and so forth. Now the other option in the hue saturation palette that might be helpful is this Colorize option. So this will just straight up change all of the colors into like more of a monotone looking color. And then I can drag my hue saturation slider, and then my color is going to just change more monotone-like. And I can increase and decrease saturation that way. So Colorize sometimes is an option, especially when I'm working on shoe images and things like that. So then I'll hit OK. And then remember, all these options are destructive color editing options. Okay. Meaning that my the base of my pixels are going to be completely changed and altered. The only way I can go back is essentially opening up my history palette and really just jumping back through and seeing what step did I leave off that I wanted it, that I thought looked best, let's just say. All right. Let's say you here's a really good selection tool as well. Let's say you have a selection and you're like, you know what, I want to do something else to this document, but I don't want to lose all the hard work I put into actually capturing this selection. Your Paths palette here is a great way, and I use Paths a lot because I love to create shapes in the pen tool and create paths using the pen tool in Photoshop. The Path palette is great too if you have a selection that you think you might want to use later on, just kind of as a little jigsaw, and you want to do something else with it potentially in the future, and you don't want to go through all those steps of creating a selection that we had, like all these steps here. So let me go ahead and go under Paths, and then if you hit this menu here on the upper right, I'll hit Cancel. You hit this menu on the upper right here, and then you hit Make Work Path. And then, so what it's going to say is Make Work Path Tolerance X amount of pixels, right? The lowest amount of pixels of tolerance, meaning plus or minus past the edge of the feather of the selection or the hard edge of the selection. It's basically like a feather, really, which is a blending of the edge. The lowest option of tolerance here is 5 pixels. You can increase this to like 10, right? But 0.5 is the lowest. So I'm going to say OK with that. And then this is actually going to create a work path out of my selection, let me see, right here, and it's really, well, my computer's not liking it too much, but let me see if I can, here we go. So you can see that it's creating points and paths out of that selection, so it's essentially saving it for me till a later time. So I have this work path here, and I can re-access it. I can make as many of these as I want, but if I create another work path, I'm going to lose the one that's currently created in my paths palette. So in order to create another one, what I typically do right away for the initial work path that I create is I double click it, and then I give it a name, and this option box is going to let me give it a name but also save the path. So this means that I can have one image, multiple paths. Let's say it's sketches from your sketchbook. You might want to use these different sketches on different projects at a later time. You can create paths in one scan of your imagery that could basically select that content for you with one click rather than going through the whole selection process over again in Photoshop, and just using that piece of content for any project that you're working on in the future. So I'm going to save this path as just, I'll call it corn husks. And that's it. So I can hit OK. That corn husks path is saved. I can basically do whatever now. I can make any kind of changes I want, and then later on, if I'd like to reselect the corn husks area, I can select that path and then hit this menu up in the upper right once again, and then hit Make Selection. And then it's going to ask me for a feather radius, whatever I'd like, and so I'll try and do the 0.5, and then I can make that selection again just like that. All right. Okay, another maybe one that could be frustrating to you later on is the layers palette here. This part of the layers palette is going to be well, basically your kind of ground zero, like home base for all of your stuff really. A lot of my Photoshop documents have like a ton of layers, a ton of different filters and stuff. Sometimes I turn them on and off. It's a very experimental software for me. I like to do a lot of experimenting, see what looks best. After a couple hours, usually I'm happy with something. But what you'll notice is I have this piece selected, and I'm going to actually just click and drag it out with my Move tool right here selected. And you can see that it's got this orange in the background, right? Because my background layer is not unlocked, it has this lock sign, the background color is going to be seen. So my background color here is this orange, right? And you can change this background color anytime you want, but that's why that's happening. So if I wanted to move this and have a transparent background, let's just say, or if I wanted to delete this selection and view transparent background, I'm just going to double click the background layer, and it's going to ask me to rename it, so I don't have to, I guess, but maybe I probably should. And then hit OK. And then now that it's unlocked, there's no lock symbol there, I can delete it, and it's transparent. I can move this around and so on, it's transparent. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you're, a lot of times I'll right away just unlock my background because I like to work on transparent backgrounds. Let's see. Another thing that I'll pull in usually right away is I always go into this photo, and this photo is pretty good. Actually, I work on a different photo, so I'm kind of done with this one. I'll close out of it. I won't save that. The next one I'm going to do is this cow PSD folder or image. So I'm going to drag the cows into Photoshop, and let's see what I have here in layers. Okay, so this layer is already unlocked, and that's good. It isn't CMYK, so I don't have to worry about changing that in the image mode. I am going to look in the image size, see what I'm working with. So it's a 12-inch image at 300 dpi resolution, so that's fine. The image is not very good from a contrast standpoint or a quality standpoint. You can see there's what they call artifacting, which is these bumps on the edges here around very detailed areas. You'll get that. So the first thing that I do when I bring in like a new image like this is I go to Image and I go to Adjustments, and then I hit Levels. And so what Levels does is it's going to increase the darks and increase the whites to make a really dark image and a really light image, and kind of integrate both of those into the same image to increase your contrast here. So my left slider is increasing those darks, my right slider is increasing the brights, and then my middle slider are my neutral tones. So usually I'll bring in the image right away and just boost this a little here, boost this a little there, nothing too crazy, and then I will move these neutral tones back and forth and see kind of where it's looking better. So this is obviously too dark. I want to increase a little bit here of the neutral tones to make them a little brighter. You can see kind of this kind of curved edge of the levels here. It kind of gives you an idea of where the where most of that action is with the colors. And then so once I move that over there, I'll increase the darks just a tad bit more, just to give it maybe a little bit more contrast. So before and after, I'll always kind of run through this and say, oh, okay, I guess that looks decent for the most part. And then the sky. So that's levels. I'll always do that in there. And then the sky piece here, I definitely want to get rid of these kind of pixelated, junky looking areas. So a really good way to do that would be to blur it. So I can blur that pretty quickly if I go into channels. And let's see, where's my highest contrast, right? I can go ahead and open up these and see in my thumbnail here, they have a ton of contrast here in yellow, and the sky is pretty clear. So I'm going to load this as a selection. And then I'm going to actually, let's see, invert that select. No, wait, no, I'm going to keep it just like that. Okay. And then I'm probably going to have to go into my, because I have some of the cow selected, and I don't want to blur any of that cow. I'm going to go to my quick mask mode, and I'm going to see, okay, what's going on here. There's a lot of this cow that's selected. So I'll jump back out of it, and I'm going to say, I want to add more. I want to take away more of this, okay, from this cow selection. And actually, the trees are kind of really over-selected too. Okay, so this is kind of a challenge. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to figure out what tool I want to use to select these cows. I don't want to take my pen tool because it's going to take too long. I'm probably going to go into my lasso tool, and then I'm going to try this magnetic lasso and see how that goes. So what the magnetic lasso is going to do is it's going to find the edge that's, and it's really going to determine sort of what I'm trying to select in pixels based on where I'm dragging my tool. So what I want to do is actually run it along the edge of this cow, and it's going to detect the difference in pixels and kind of plop a selection there for me as I'm going. Now, as you can see, I have a lot of this selected already, so my icon is not showing the actual tool here. What I have to do is add or remove from this selection, okay, that I already have selected, right, based on my quick mask mode. So I have too much of that cow selected, so what I want to do is remove from my current selection. So I'm going to hold the Alt key with my tool here, my layer here. I'm going to hold the Alt key, and you can see that there's a minus sign there on the tool with the Alt key. If I hit Shift, that can add to the selection, okay? So it's going to add to my current selection or subtract to my current selection. Now, again, this is because I have something already selected here on the desktop. So I'm going to click it with the minus sign, kind of run through the edge of this guy, and then you can see that it's kind of just plopping things down pretty decently. And I don't want this to be perfect. I mean, I do want it to be perfect as possible, but it doesn't have to be, because really my goal is to actually oh, what the hell? Sorry. Okay. My goal here is to actually blur the sky. So really the accuracy of this selection doesn't have to be really that amazing. But I want it to be decent. So I'm just going to kind of go around this. right here. I'm really going to rough this area because my sky isn't really going to touch this too much. This is really just the area that I'm concerned with. Now, as I'm dragging this around, I'm really zoomed into this character, so I only have to hit the Alt key once, or the Option key once. Sorry, Alt Option key, and then start my selection, and it'll stay as a deselecting whatever I'm rolling over kind of tool. And as I'm going around this, when I'm getting close to the edge, you can see kind of how I'm getting out of bounds here with my guy. I can start hitting the delete key to delete some of these points that were plopped down. As I'm getting close to the edge of the canvas here, I can actually hit my space bar and create this little hand, and then that will actually let me click and drag and sort of center my image. So this is just a quick kind of rough in here. Let's go around this guy. Let's see, where did I start? Kind of go back over here. I'll double click. Okay, so double clicking it, just totally close my selection. I'll go to quick mask mode again. And you can see, like, okay, I got most of this guy already good. Okay, so now I'm going to hit my my eraser tool, and then just kind of go in here and deselect all these leg pieces, right? Just kind of more quickly if I could, because I didn't really have to go out and trace this guy all the way. And then to do this other guy, it shouldn't be that hard. I should just go into my lasso, Magnetic Lasso tool again, kind of zoom in here, and Option click, and then kind of roll through this again. So just kind of depending on what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to select, some of these tools might make more sense than others, but if you can select the majority of something and then kind of refine your selection with these kind of selection tools, these lassos, magnetic lassos, maybe it's a pen tool, things like that, maybe it's a brush, it makes your job, like, a lot faster. So this area I'll just kind of rough in, finish them out, double click, okay, check my quick mask mode again, okay. So then I'll go into my brush here, I'm sorry, my eraser tool, and then just erase this extra selection stuff here. Trees I'm not too worried about. Those can kind of get faded because they're way in the background anyhow, so it would make sense that they were maybe out of focus in the image and that type of thing. Looking at those kind of elements of the photo too, what's in my foreground, what's in my background, what's my focus, you can kind of make sort of decisions like that. So I have really essentially the sky piece selected now, and I'm going to go into let's see, filter, and here it's going to go into the blur, and then Gaussian blur. This is just a basic blur that you can do. This is way too much, right? So here's my preview. I'm turning it on and off. Way too much of a blur. I want to tone it down a bit because really my goal is to get rid of some of those pixelated areas up at the top as best I can. So that helps. Maybe increase just a little bit more. All right. So that's that. I'll hit Command D to deselect. And let's see. Sharpness, that would be a good filter to put to the cows. So what I'm going to do actually is go back to my history palette, right? So when I deselected it, I maybe was going a little too quick there. So I want to go back one step to my Gaussian blur step. Kind of blurred it pretty well, okay. Better than it was. And so what I'll do is just do a invert selection, okay. So inverse my selection, select inverse, hit my quick mask mode. I can see, yep, that's what I want selected. And then I'll just go to image adjustment. Nope, I'm sorry, it's going to filter and sharpen. And then here I'll do a smart sharpen. And what I'll probably want to do is on my image here is go into like a really focal point area. So this guy's face, he's got a lot of hair and detail. So let me see. if I can preview, takes a little bit of my RAM here. Kind of bring down the radius. That's like the width or the area about where my sharpening is happening, and I'll hit OK. This is a really hard kind of step on the computer. It kind of sort of really heats up from that. Okay, so I'll hit Command D and deselect, and I'll go back and see if I can look at what the sharpening. Yeah, so it helped it a little bit. It did make it like look more crisp. So there's that piece of it. And actually the grass blades look a lot sharper too. All right, so are there any questions on that so far at all? Okay. I'm actually going to give you a break now.